Hi everyone, Rob Scott here from CX Today, and in today's session we're going to be tackling one of the hottest and most misunderstood topics in customer experience, and that's agentic AI. Now, the industry has moved way beyond chatbots, and we're talking about AI that doesn't just answer questions now, it takes action, from rescheduling deliveries to booking appointments and closing support tickets. So joining me to unpack what this really means for the contact center frontline is Calvin Hohner, lead product manager from Dialpad, who's going to take us through agentic AI and how it's transforming CX, reducing agent burnout and delivering measurable business outcomes. So let's dive in. Welcome, Calvin. How's it going?
Very good. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. And this is a really big topic for us, the CX Today audience. So keen to get stuck in. But let's start with the bigger picture first of all. What do you mean when you say, don't call it a bot? How does agentic AI differ from the chatbots most of us are familiar with?
Yeah, I think at a foundational level, our relationship with these things is changing. And in particular, how we're sort of bringing them online or bringing them into the world to interact with our customers is foundationally changing as well. I think of bots being programmed, right? Input, output, right? If A or A, B, or C, or D, return X, right? In our context, that started off as keyword and key phrase tracking, right? If something happens in a conversation, if this particular key phrase is spoken, then provide this resource, right? And that's incredibly valuable and provides a lot of benefit still, for a number of customers, right? And a number of use cases apply to that. Then the LLMs came online, and with RAG, it was still an input-output based sort of scenario, but just the inputs and outputs became a little more flexible. When you're using natural language, it can be more nuanced and more specific. And yes, the ability for an LLM to, parse a corpus of knowledge and produce a novel answer that's specific to the input that it's given is incredible, right? And again, still, and for a long time, into the future, we'll have a number of use cases that's relevant for. But still, sort of this, if-then thing, right? Which to me is a very sort of programmatic way of thinking about bringing something online, right? We're to the point where we're no longer programming bots so much. We're more empowering agents. And I think that that's really a foundational shift as well, right? So when we're thinking about the difference between a bot or an agent, it's not that program if then, it's more we're giving the agent access to systems, and we're giving it tools, and we're giving it a set of skills and actions that it can take based on the various systems that we're giving it access to, right? And then we're giving it guardrails, right? Things that we absolutely don't want it to do or should absolutely be escalated to a human agent, et cetera, right? And then we're saying, okay, given all these parameters, given these guidelines, given these particular set of skills that we've given you, now go serve our customers, right? It's much more an empowering motion rather than sort of programming something to go and accomplish a particular task. And so it's sort of a foundational change for the worker in terms of how we're bringing these things online, but instead of just performing a specific task, now these things are sort of working alongside the human agents to offload the work that is, really mundane to a human. And so it's this difference between programming and empowering or providing guidelines for that I think is that foundational shift, at least to me.
And just for clarity, when you're talking about agents, we're not talking about human agents, right? We're talking about AI agents, correct?
Yes, we are talking about digital agents here. So, the bot agent distinction, it's semantics at the end of the day, but the term agent speaks to the capabilities that they're now bringing to the table. Again, I think it's just sort of a foundational difference in the way that we're approaching these entities now, writ large, right? Not just in the CX space, but across various industries. So it's an interesting time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, many contact centers already use chatbots, and I'm sure. Many have also got generative AI assistants nowadays. So where exactly does agentic AI sit in the evolution, and how does it kind of, can we just dig a little bit deeper in terms of how it's raising the bar over the other two?
Yeah. So previously, bots were able to provide answers, right? Again, very nuanced, specific answers in many cases. But agents are actually able to take action, right? They're able to actually write to the systems that we're giving them access to. And so that's the foundational difference as well, right? Previously, when we're giving access to any system, it's for retrieval, it's for the LLM to go in and parse all that knowledge and produce an answer. Now the bot, the agent, is actually able to write to those systems, again based on the specific parameters that it's been given, right? So checking order status, rescheduling things, booking appointments, two-factor identity, just sort of those things that you kind of needed a human to do because they were entering information places, now can be offloaded to an agent.
And now that makes perfect sense. And a lot of legacy vendors are rebranding old features as agentic. I mean, how can CX leaders separate the marketing hype from genuine agentic capabilities?
Great question. And I would say that CX leaders shouldn't be pursuing agentic for agentic's sake, right? CX leaders should be thinking about what use cases they have, what repetitive tasks are currently done by humans, and what could be offloaded to now this agentic entity that can actually take action. And that should sort of be the extent of it. Like, you shouldn't really think about the underlying, terminology or whether this is agentic or not necessarily. It should all be driven by the use case that you're trying to accomplish, right? And vendors will certainly meet you halfway, right? They will be bringing to you common use cases, as well as be willing to work with you, on the art of the possible, on the things that are very specific to your business and that they haven't thought of yet, in order to, sort of bring those flows and workflows into fruition, right? So don't worry about the terminology so much, and don't be pursuing a solution just because it's, the coolest thing in the hype. Now, what I will say is, I do think it's important for CX leaders to keep abreast of how this technology is changing, because what it's doing is it's opening up the scope of what's possible, right? And the CX leader is going to know far better, specific to their business, the problems that need to be solved versus a vendor, right? And so I think that that's kind of the triangulation that a CX leader needs to be thinking about, is knowing what the capabilities of the technology are, and then thinking about their business and thinking about the use cases. And the right vendor will be the ones that are meeting you halfway, that are, hey, solving the problems that you've already thought about, right? The scheduling an appointment type thing. And then also be excited about your industry in particular and your ideas in the space and bringing them to fruition, because that's really what's changing also, is the ability to create workflows that are much more tailored to your individual business is also part of this whole shift to agentic as well. And so that's kind of how you think about it. Don't again, know what the technology can do, and I think that's really exciting and really empowering. But don't be pursuing a buzzword for the buzzword's sake. Really, like, anchor it on the use cases that are going to provide value to you. And I may sound a little obvious now that I say it, but yeah, that's really the thing. Find a vendor that is forward thinking, that is an expert in the space, because a lot of folks really don't know how this is going to evolve. And it's all about the expertise and the willingness to make this type of technology work for your business, that folks should be focused on.
Yeah, and that makes perfect sense, because things are evolving fast. What OpenAI released ChatGPT now just almost 3 years ago. And we've seen the pace of innovation with AI, and, agentic AI really only hit the market fairly recently. So, it will be certainly one to watch, but you don't want to be kind of backing the wrong horse, I suppose. So that, if it's just if you get a feeling that it's a reskinned legacy chatbot, then, approach with caution. But it's great advice. You've described agentic AI as AI that acts. So can you share some kind of real world examples of tasks that these agents can actually handle end to end, just for our audience, and things that were impossible for bots to do a few years ago, some examples of things that they can do now.
Yeah, I mean, the real answer to that is like thinking about the various systems that are involved in any process, and then again, like any sort of right action that's taken in there, right? So, for example, I was just with one of our healthcare customers, and right now, they have human agents doing patient verification, which is obviously a critical step in the process, making sure that you're talking to the person who they say they are. And so that patient verification dips into their CRM, it dips into the EMR, the electronic medical record, the system that they're using. And then, it requires this human agent to copy a phone number from over here and paste it over here for verification, for example, right? And to go through these steps that are mundane to just, know the customer that they're talking to. And so that's a perfect example of a flow that can be offloaded to Agentic, right? You're taking, the input from the customer. They're saying, hey, this is my, address and my date of birth and all of that stuff. And you're knitting together this workflow that was literally the start of every customer conversation that I was overhearing. I was sitting in their contact center. I was sitting with the agents, listening to them take patient calls, and that was just like, I was sitting there being like, this is ripe for an agentic flow, because it can take this verification step that is a lot of clicking around and waste time at the start of every single call. We could offload that to an agent, right? So right now it's those type of things where it's, what is a human doing where you really believe that a human doesn't need to be doing that, right? Shipping confirmations, two-factor authentication, like I just talked about, order status, booking appointments, scheduling, all those types of sort of light touch flows where it's just an agent popping in, maybe entering some information, checking some information, verifying something. Those are ripe for Agentic at the moment.
And that makes good sense. If you're taking data and input it into another system, that's potentially what could be automated, with an agentic solution.
Exactly.
Cool. Yeah. Well, thanks for the example. I mean, Dialpad, is launching with both voice and chat agents. So why is voice such a critical part of this story, and how does it differ from, legacy IVR systems, for example?
Yeah, so I think there's two kind of key things to think about with voice. And the first is, it is the right interface for the way that technology is moving, right? If you go back to like thinking about my, programming versus guiding analogy before, text input is a really good interface when you have to fit specific formats, when you have to be really, sort of templated and specific with the input that you're giving, right? Now with, Agentic and to a lesser extent, some of the RAG-based models and things before, because that the specificity of what you need to enter is being opened up, natural language, that's what we're talking about, right? And voice just is the best way to deliver natural language. And so I think that it's sort of the right medium for the future, and is going to be the norm as this sort of like, very specific interface need kind of goes away. So like, for example, we're soon going to market with like a natural language interface layer over our analytics suite, for example, right? So instead of doing some dragging and dropping and, clicking a bunch of filters, you can just say, hey, show me my top 10 agents across these call centers over the last 30 days in terms of speed to resolution, right? And you can just speak that. And behind the scenes, it's doing the same thing that it's doing as if you, had done a bunch of filters and, dragging and dropping and things like that and entering date ranges or whatever. But again, because we have the ability to interact with these systems in natural language, that's just, our voice is the natural way to do that, right? So I think, as the market for this matures and as AI becomes a more important piece of like the consumer space out there in general, end users are becoming more comfortable with it. Folks calling into call centers are becoming more comfortable with it. It's just the natural sort of progression, and it's the right interface at the end of the day. Now, how it's different from traditional IVRs is the quality and the latency and all of sort of the technical differences, right? We've all been on trying to give our ID number to an IVR or something like that, and it gets it wrong, and you have to re-enter it, and all that type of things. But and then the latency as well. The time it takes for the other side to parse that information and give you a response.
There's
Previously,
no context ever, is there? Yeah,
yeah,
no information ever gets passed through a menu.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
So now, because the technology is in a place, it's just so much better, and the latency is there, where it actually can feel like a normal conversation. We're still to the point where I think the end user and customers want that interaction to, like, you want to know that it's a digital agent at the end of the day. I still think that that's kind of where we are in the space, but the latency is such that you can actually have a natural, conversation with it. So, I'm talking to an agent, but hey, it's giving me responses in the same, clip that you would be. So we're there. The technology has evolved to that point.
Absolutely, we are there, aren't we? Because we're all using these AI tools, and the natural language is so, such a level now where you can just trust that what you're going to say is going to be heard, and more than likely going to be translated into something the computer can understand. So, I mean, it's amazing how far we've come. No longer have we got all these kind of rigid menus and unnatural flows through contact centers or through the menus and everything else. So it's great to see this, and knowing that an AI can help navigate me towards where I need to go, I just think that's so much more efficient for everyone. I mean, how important is omni-channel consistency in the age of agentic AI? What happens when an agent moves from web chat to a voice call, for example? Because we often do want to move between channels. So how can AI keep context, seamless?
Yeah. I mean, we've all been there where we've entered our information and we're in the wrong department and get transferred to the different department and have to give our information again, right? So we've all been there. So maintaining that context throughout that chain is obviously incredibly important. And Agentic allows us to do that now, right? So with the escalation from a bot to a human, a digital agent to a human agent, we're going to have to get used to how we talk about that. Digital agents, human agents. I still, say agent, and then I'm unclear. Anyway,
that's
with
a
that
whole
handoff,
other conversation, I think, that one.
Yeah, exactly. With that handoff, or potentially handoff, between different digital agents out there, maintaining all that data and essentially treating it as a warm transfer and passing along everything that transpired in that digital interaction to the human is absolutely critical. And the right vendors are going to be the ones who can keep that continuity as these transfers happen. Context is also not just what happened on the call, though, right? And I think that that's an important distinction that we now have access to with Agentic is context can come from other systems, right? We can be dipping into a CRM and looking at a customer's purchase history while they're having a customer support interaction, right? And so if that gets escalated to a human, you could pass along that additional context too, not just what happened on the call or in that digital interaction before it became a voice call with a human, right? So it's key to maintaining that the customer satisfaction in that handoff, and I think it can be actually a value driver too, because we've all had that experience. So if I get handed off to a human and they have additional context about me already, and they're like, no, let's dive into the problem, like that's a way better experience, and that takes that support interaction. Even beyond what it would have been if it was just a digital interaction. So it's really the human and the digital agent working together, which I think is really exciting.
Yes, that's great. Great advice. Well, I mean, customers, organizations, often, want to see some value from these investments, so let's talk about return on investment for a moment. What measurable outcomes should CX leaders and potentially even revenue leaders in businesses expect when deploying agentic AI, from reducing handle times to, I suppose, improving customer satisfaction scores, and even revenue retention, as mentioned, it's a big deal nowadays, isn't it, for these organizations? So what would you say to that? How should customers look at ROI?
Yeah, so I think the traditional metrics aren't going away. They're still obviously incredibly relevant. Time to resolution, all those types of things on which a human agent is traditionally judged are still relevant. Now, I think the nature of what is good or not might be changing, right? Think about this. If you're handling a bunch of mundane tasks that used to be handled by a human agent with a digital agent and only escalating to that human the more challenging problems, then, their call handle times are going to go up, things like that, right? But you should see that agent satisfaction increase because they're handling, more challenging scenarios and things like that, right? So I think that the root metrics are going to be there, but I think we need to subtly rethink how they might change in terms of what's good or not. The second big thing that you hit on too is that, a contact center is no longer purely a cost center, right? It can really, really be a revenue driver, right? If you're taking all that context that happens in the conversation and your knowledge about the caller and you're escalating to, a sales agent because they're talking about how their machine's broken and that's their troubleshooting thing, but you've released this new product that can help with that or whatever, that becomes a clear escalation path to revenue. Or, it can be even, less direct to a salesperson. It can be like, hey, based on that customer interaction, I'm adding that customer to a nurture campaign, sending outbound emails for new products and services that relate directly to what they talked about, right? So foundationally, these contact centers are no longer cost centers, right? You need to be thinking about them holistically with your business and how they can feed in to the real revenue driving aspects of your business, like sales. The third thing on metrics is that, I hit on this, but I think agent satisfaction and turnover and metrics like that are going to improve as well. It's a simple fact: if someone's doing more interesting work, they're going to be more motivated, they're going to perform better, and they're much more likely to stick around, right? So I think that the nature of the agent's job is going to be changing for the better as well because of this, and that has a lot of knock-on benefits to, ultimately what the customer is feeling.
Yeah, it certainly almost feels a lot less repetitive for the agent, doesn't it? The human agent, if they're not having to go, repeat themselves and ask all these questions because the AI is doing it. So yeah, certainly it sounds like an overall better experience for the agents. I mean,
definitely.
How do you, just looking ahead, how do you see this playing out? What's next on the roadmap for agentic AI? And, how do you see it expanding its capabilities, channels, and business impacts maybe over, say, the next 12 to 18 months?
Yeah. I think there's actually three distinct and very complementary ways that the market is going to evolve over the next, year and a half. First of all, the technology is just the base level technology that all of this is built on is getting better and better, right? Getting access to ChatGPT 5 and just looking at the change in the model from 5 to the previous iterations, the quality is leaps and bounds better, right? So that is going to continue and open up new possibilities that we can't even think of yet. The more perhaps concrete way for the CX leaders thinking that the way this market is going to expand is, again, as we talked to earlier, much of what's happening now is the opening up of varying systems that can then be stitched together in workflows, right? So the more software systems that become part of this ecosystem, the more that you can do in various domains, right? And so the ecosystem in and of itself is going to be growing because it's becoming this big, again, ecosystem of these varying systems that are now able to talk to one another rather than sitting in their own silos as they were previously. Now, I think that the most, or not most important, I think those are equally important, but another perhaps overlooked way that the market is going to change is just in consumer behavior, right? We spoke a little bit before about how, text entry slowly transitioning to natural language and voice. That kind of thing is going to be playing out across any industries. It's going to be playing out in the consumer space as consumers, you and I, are more comfortable interacting with these digital agents in myriad ways, again, in B2B and B2C. That sort of acceptance of the technology and the trust in it, right, is only going to increase. And that's going to allow these digital agents to do more and more complex workflows because the end user has confidence in it, right? Most basically where we're at now, it's one thing for, me as the person who built this thing to have confidence that this agent can book book an appointment in a doctor's office, right? It's another thing for the patient to have confidence that their appointment has actually correctly been booked, right? There's ways that you can, support that, automate text messages and emails, following up to confirm in this particular case. But again, it's just that sort of acceptance of the technology and the way that it's going to move into our everyday lives is only going to increase, and thus the power of what a digital agent can do is going to increase as well. And so just more complicated workflows, more things end to end, less humans. There's always going to be humans in the loop. Particularly on the timeline that you laid out, 12 to 18 months. But it's really kind of these two entities working alongside one another now, right? The human and the digital, rather than the human having, much more sort of an oversight position over a bot, if you will. So yeah, those are kind of the three, I think, distinct ways that the market is going to expand.
Great. Well, we've just ended on some great advice there and some things to think about. Calvin, thank you so much for joining me today. And thanks for giving us a clearer picture of what don't call it a bot really means in practice. It's clear that agentic AI represents a step change for CX leaders looking to deliver faster resolutions and reduce things like agent burnout and ultimately drive better business outcomes, as you mentioned. So, and to our audience, for more videos, stories and insights into the future of customer experience and lots more on Agentic AI, head over to cxtoday.com. And I'm Rob Scott from CX Today. Thanks for watching.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me, Rob.